Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Tiesenghausen is here with you. Today is May 28th, and here are the main news stories at this moment. Putin is preparing Moscow for additional strikes. In Moscow, anti-aircraft missile systems have begun to be installed on the roofs of office buildings using helicopters. Let's watch this video. This is the installation of a Pantsir S-1 anti-aircraft missile system using a heavy Mi-26T transport helicopter onto the roof of the 42-story Nord Star Tower in Moscow. Let me remind you, it's the 5th year since the full-scale invasion, and I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that, apparently, they plan to shoot down drones right over residential buildings in Moscow. That means this gun from the Pantsir system will be firing right at those residential buildings. The main thing is to make sure nothing reaches the Kremlin. By the way, I checked the map, and this Nord Star business center, where they're installing the Pantsir, is located on Begovaya Street. It's not far from the Vagankovo cemetery, and there are plenty of residential buildings around. That's exactly where the Pantsir will be firing. Muscovites, welcome to the new reality. Say thank you to Putin. And one more piece of news. In the publication Moskovsky Komsomolets, which is among the top Russian media outlets despite its name, there's an article with the following title: Astonishing Defeats, When Geopolitical Losses Can Be More Useful Than Brilliant Victories. The mechanism of the Russian historical path has always turned defeat into victory. Society prefers to take pride in victories rather than remember defeats. And if defeats are recalled, it is done with a natural sense of bitterness. Yet in Russia, it is precisely lost wars and humiliating truces that have regularly led to new breakthroughs, reforms, and, surprisingly enough, new victories. Writes Moskovsky Komsomolets. What is this even? Is this some kind of warming up of the deep people for defeat? Am I getting this right? In general, the idea that the main thing is that we held out has been actively pushed on Russian TV for a long time now. I've heard more than once how propagandists voice these kinds of ideas, that Ukraine is actually a burden, not a prize. Destroyed infrastructure, a hostile population, the need to rebuild everything at your own expense. How is that a prize? Why would we even want such a Ukraine? Recently, Solovyov suddenly started saying, "Why do we need Odessa? There aren't any Russians left there anyway." I mean, this is pure Orwell, just pure. If it's impossible to win in this reality, what do they do in Russia? They reformat reality. War is peace, defeat is victory. Do you understand? Moskovsky Komsomolets is a publication that exists strictly within the boundaries of what is permitted. When they publish an article there with the thesis that defeat can be more useful than victory, it's not some act of journalistic bravery or someone overlooking something. It's an absolutely coordinated message with the Kremlin. And honestly, Moskovsky Komsomolets in 2026 sounds kind of creepy. By the way, they still have Komsomolskaya Pravda too. The Russian tabloid Komsomolskaya Pravda. Well, what do you expect when Russia is still run by zombie Komsomol members frozen in amber? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You can do it right now. It's important for the channel's promotion. We're fighting against Putin's propaganda, fighting against this scourge. Let's do it together. So make sure to subscribe. The European Union wants to demand that Russia reduce its army and withdraw it from the unrecognized territories of South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and the unrecognized Transnistria. The head of EU diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, stated that the European Union intends to formulate its own demands for Russia as part of possible peace negotiations with Ukraine. These demands will be discussed at the meeting of the European Union foreign ministers. You know, when they say that Russia should withdraw its troops from everywhere it has created frozen conflicts, it sometimes seems to me that Europe is trolling Russia in this way from time to time. With such a poker face, they propose surrendering voluntarily. It's clear that the deranged underground Kablukan will once again start cranking out his old tune, you know, about how no one has ever defeated Russia since the Pechenegs. Sarmat, Burevestnik, Oreshnik, Pelmeshnik, Kokoko, and Oberval. He'll spout all of that again. Obviously, after this news, Medvedev will just drink himself into oblivion, then come to and start scribbling threats. Just recently, he really outdid himself. European diplomats weren't scared by the threats from the Russian Federation and didn't leave Kiev. And so Medvedev, sitting on his little kiddie chair, swinging his legs, was yelling and writing all sorts of nonsense. So Europe has a lot of diplomats. I'll show them yet. Look at what these European diplomats allow themselves to do. Sometimes it seems to me that European diplomats throw out topics like this just to watch a fireworks show of outraged Russian officials from afar. But for some reason I feel like there's a lack of a real super troll among the Europeans. Someone really subtle like that. For some reason the image of the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, immediately comes to mind. It always seems to me that he looks at everyone with a kind of slyness, understands everything, talks to Trump and then turns as if to say, yes, I get it. I understand everything. Well, that's just how it has to be. And he somehow manages to do it just with a look. I can just picture Alexander Stubb in some interview saying, Donald Trump and I were recently on an American aircraft carrier, talking about politics, talking about golf. But I've never been on a Russian aircraft carrier. Oh, but Russia doesn't have any aircraft carriers. Sorry, I forgot. You know, yesterday I came across a wonderful video. If I had seen it earlier, I would have included it in yesterday's episode, but I just can't help but show it to you now. Yesterday was the day of Special Operations Forces, 10 years since the creation of Ukraine's SOF. In yesterday's episode, I congratulated everyone involved on this date, but it was only afterwards that I came across this remarkable video. But it struck me so much that I decided I absolutely had to show it to you. On the anniversary, operators of Ukraine's Special Operations Forces recorded a cover of Volodymyr Ivashuk's song, "The Song Will Be Among Us." The people you see on screen are real Special Operations Forces operators. Please take a look.
Пролягла дорога від твоїх воріт до моїх воріт, як струна.
А чому згубився твій самотній слід? Знаєш, ти одна, Але осінь отой слід листям ще не вкрила, бо до тебе навесні я повернусь мила. Твої руки я візьму знову в свої руки, не розквітне поміж нас жовтий квіт розлуки. Не ховай очей блакитний промінь, заспівай мені в останній раз, пісню ту візьму собі на спомин, пісня буде поміж нас. Бо твій голос, щедра повінь, я мов колос, зелен голос нею повен, жовтий лист впаде й виросте зелений, а ти в пісні будеш завжди біля мене. Жовтий лист впаде й виросте зелений, а ти в пісні будеш завжди біля мене.
Жовтий лист спаде й виросте зелений, а ти в пісні будеш завжди біля мене.
Listen, isn't it awesome? And in every episode, we have an important fundraiser for Ukraine's defense forces. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for the Freedom of Russia Legion, which is fighting for Ukraine. The fundraiser is for repairing damaged equipment. The fighters of the Legion are currently fighting on almost all of the hottest fronts. And another important point, the Legion not only battles at the front, but also causes a lot of trouble deep in the Russian rear. The commander of the Legion, the legendary Caesar, has recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Дорогой Борис Тизенгаузен, уважаемые подписчики его канала, от имени бойцов Легиона Свобода России я хочу поблагодарить вас за всю ту помощь, которую вы нам не раз оказывали. Сейчас я снова обращаюсь к вам за помощью. Нам нужны средства на ремонт наших автомобилей, нам нужны средства на закупку БПЛА. Мы будем вам очень благодарны и в этот раз. Вместе с вами мы обязательно победим. Слава Украине! Свобода России!
Let's help the Legion. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are Mono and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. In every episode, I thank you personally, both from myself and from the hundreds of our warriors whom you have already helped. You are simply incredible, and together we are a great force. Thank you so much. There are two pieces of news coming up one after another, and they are connected. Russia and Afghanistan have signed an agreement on military technical cooperation. The details and terms of the agreement are not provided. Well, usually such agreements mean that the parties will exchange weapons, licenses, military technologies, and work on modern developments together. Well, I think you perfectly understand who will be transferring weapons, developments, and so on to whom. In short, Putin has decided, if the barn is burning, let the house burn too. A clearance sale of military technologies and weapons to terrorists, dictators, and radicals, discounts for everyone. Let me remind you, in April of last year, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation removed the Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations in Russia. You see how simple it all is. And now, the second piece of news. So this is the kind of collaboration Putin has. Norway has joined France's nuclear umbrella, obviously due to Russia's rearmament and concerns about weakening support from the United States. Well, Europe is forming its own configurations differently. On May 27th at the Élysée Palace, the defense ministers of France and Norway signed a bilateral agreement that includes the provision of the French nuclear umbrella. Norway is a NATO member and shares a border with Russia in the Arctic. The fact that it is Norway taking this step right now is, strategically, more significant than if it had been done by any other country. Let's be honest. The crazy Botoxed old man, through his reckless actions, has armed all of Europe better than anyone else ever could. In other words, Putin has armed Europe, figuratively speaking. Meanwhile, the Botox jellyfish has rushed off to Kazakhstan. Today is the second day of Putin's visit to Kazakhstan. As part of the official welcoming ceremony, Kazakhstan's Air Force planes painted the sky over Astana in the colors of the Russian tricolor. Putin arrived in Kazakhstan on a state visit. You know, it would have been more appropriate to paint the sky scarlet red when a man responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people comes to visit you. Shame on you, Mr. Tokayev. Shame. To welcome the modern-day Hitler with full honors, turning a blind eye to the murdered and abducted Ukrainian children, to the burned Ukrainian cities, that is a disgrace. At the same time, I want to express my gratitude to the Kazakh people who support Ukraine. We appreciate it. Thank you. NATO has simulated a war over the Baltic states and predicted Russia's defeat due to drones. Right now, various forecasts and simulations are taking place within the alliance. So, Russian forces are capable of striking from three directions to seize a significant part of Lithuania and cover it with their nuclear weapons, effectively depriving NATO of the ability to mount a collective response. But that's under one condition: if Lithuania does not have around 12,000 drones controlled by artificial intelligence, which would then destroy more than a third of the advancing troops. These conclusions were drawn following a command and staff exercise conducted by Pentagon employees and officers of the U.S. Armed Forces. Well, European military officials now believe that the contingent is at the greatest risk in the period leading up to the U.S. presidential elections in 2028. I mean, the contingent in the Baltic countries. The Times writes about this. Against the backdrop of Trump soon breaking NATO from within, Putin's so-called special military operation has reached a dead end in Ukraine, and Putin may try to escalate in an attempt to then achieve a freeze of the war in Ukraine on terms more favorable to himself. That is, against the backdrop of escalating tensions with the Baltic countries, which will be discussed a bit later. Such a scenario cannot be ruled out. Moreover, Putin has already prepared for this. He recently passed a law on protecting Russians abroad, including the use of the military for this purpose. Well, unfortunately, there is another reality. It's one thing to have 12,000 drones, it's another thing to make the decision to use them instantly. And not just drones, by the way, and to know how to use them. I have absolutely no doubt about the determination of the Baltic countries, not in the slightest. What I doubt is that Donald Trump would make a decision within the alliance to defend someone. Well, right now he has plenty of excuses. There's a big, beautiful ocean between us. This isn't our war. They didn't help me in the Strait of Hormuz with Iran, didn't help. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, you see, didn't send hundreds of aircraft carriers to help Donald Trump. The only ones who can actually stop the Russians in reality are the Ukrainians. It's been proven they can stop them. That's why a new alliance must be formed with Ukraine. I'm already talking about the new alliance essentially as a done deal, because judging by everything, it will definitely happen. I think that's how it will be. NATO's chances of capturing Kaliningrad in the event of a direct conflict with Russia are zero. Even attempts to do so would result in extremely serious consequences for the alliance. This was stated by Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko. And I proceed from the assumption that, after all, NATO, especially in military circles, understands that any such attempts, whether to blockade or to capture Kaliningrad, will lead to the most severe consequences for those who are planning them. He also noted that Russia has all the resources necessary to defend the Russian exclave. At the same time, Grushko drew attention to the fact that, according to him, the Baltic Sea continues to turn into an arena of confrontation. But who is stirring up trouble in the Baltic Sea, huh? They just can't seem to calm down. They keep dreaming that NATO will attack Kaliningrad or Voronezh or Syzran or somewhere else. When Russians are asked on the street why NATO would attack them, they say that the terrible West wants Russian resources. Here's a hint for you, Russians. Putin has done everything so that Russia gives away these resources for next to nothing. Why would anyone attack you if you extract these resources yourselves, package them, and deliver them to the desired country, all for a pittance? Putin has done everything to make this happen. By the way, you can ask China and India about it. Estonia is trying to withdraw from agreements with Russia on the delimitation of Lake Peipus and the Narva River, which is fraught with conflict, said the first deputy director of the FSB and head of the FSB border service, Vladimir Kulishov. The Estonian authorities are trying to back away from honoring the agreements, blah, 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 and so on. Lake Peipus, Narva boys, and everything else. Notice that it's not a representative of the foreign ministry speaking, but a representative of the FSB. The domestic audience in Russia has long been conditioned to believe that Estonia is provoking them, seriously provoking them. Russia is now systematically creating an atmosphere of border instability around the Baltic countries. This is happening on several fronts at once. Migration crises, GPS jamming in the Baltic, various threats, including to infrastructure. The story about the infringement of Russian speakers' rights. By the way, it's been a while since anyone touched the cables on the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Looks like Patrushev isn't doing his job properly over there. I think he'll crawl out of his hole soon and start causing trouble again. The story about the infringement of all sorts of Russian speakers' rights. And now there are also water disputes. This is a typical model of hybrid pressure to create many small points of tension in order to gradually and constantly increase this pressure, keeping the region in a nervous state. There's a very interesting point here. Putin is trying to test NATO's strength from the outside, while Donald Trump is trying to split NATO from within. I understand why Putin needs this, but why does Donald Trump need it? By the way, write your own theories in the comments. And one more piece of purely Russian news. In Russia, it has been proposed to rename hamburgers to kotletniki in order to combat foreign influence. Oh, life will be good then, right? The chairman of the Communists of Russia Party, Sergei Malenkovich, suggested that in a year the use of the word hamburger should be abandoned and replaced with Russian equivalents, for example, kotletnik. Let me quote this Russian politician. In our country's history, there was already a period of fighting foreign influence when the French roll was renamed to city loaf. We don't need American fast food culture, slapdash. We can think about new names. For example, call a hamburger kotletnik or kokoshnik in honor of our traditional headdress, or Leningrad sandwich. Of course, people won't change their habits instantly, but gradually the new name will come into fashion. To restructure the business, a legal period should be given, for example, a year. Call it kokoshnik. Interesting, Leningrad sandwich. Does he even know that the word buterbrod isn't exactly Russian either? And in general, if he were left with only Russian words, he would be very surprised. I guarantee you that this communist, this Malenkovich, is calling to reject everything Western while typing yet another post on his hated iPhone, and then, jumping into his hated Mercedes, rushes off somewhere to the airport and flies away for the weekend to the hated French Riviera to be with his family. Well, that's what he is, the modern Russian patriot, and a communist at that. And you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel. Don't forget. And I ask you very much, let's help the Legion. Our help is very much needed by them right now. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.